On Thanksgiving Day, I found my 8-year-old grandson Leo shivering on my son's porch in 5-degree weather. Inside, my son Andre and his wife Chloe were carving a golden turkey laughing with friends. I kicked their door off its hinges, and with 6 words I activated a legal trap my late wife and I had set years before. A trap that would cost them their home, their careers, and the lavish life they built by forgetting what family truly means. Before I tell you how a single sweet potato pie led to the complete destruction of their perfect world, let me know in the comments where you are listening from. And please like and subscribe if you believe that no child should ever be left out in the cold. My name is Silas Blackwood, and at 72 years old, I thought I understood the nature of cold. I had lived through the brutal winters of New Jersey, felt the biting chill on construction sites at dawn, and I knew the profound cold of a house that is empty after your partner of 50 years is gone. But none of it prepared me for the cold I felt on that Thanksgiving afternoon. It all started in my old Buick, a car my Rose and I bought together over a decade ago. On the passenger seat, still warm and wrapped in foil, was a sweet potato pie. It was Rose's recipe. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filled the car, a ghost of happier holidays of a time when our home was loud and full of love. I was driving to my son's house unannounced. The formal invitations had dried up a few years back, replaced by dutiful short phone calls that always felt like items being checked off a list. A deep chasm had formed between us, and this pie was my attempt to build a bridge. It was a peace offering, a silent reminder of the family we used to be. Andre's neighborhood always made me feel like a visitor from another planet. The houses were enormous, set back on perfectly manicured lawns, each one a silent fortress of wealth. It was too quiet, too orderly. It lacked the vibrant chaos of the streets where I raised him, where the sounds of kids playing and neighbors calling to one another were the soundtrack of our lives. I parked down the street, needing a moment to gather myself. The pie felt warm in my hands, a small anchor to the past as I walked up the cold stone path to my son's front door. Through the large dining room window, I saw a scene straight out of a magazine. The room was bathed in a warm golden light. Andre stood at the head of a long table carving a massive glistening turkey. His wife Chloe was smiling, pouring red wine into crystal glasses. A few of their friends, strangers to me, were laughing, their faces glowing with holiday cheer. A fire crackled in the hearth, and my 1-year-old granddaughter Ava was safe and snug in her high chair. It was a perfect picture of family, of prosperity and happiness. I felt a familiar pang of being on the outside, looking in, a ghost at their feast. I was about to raise my hand to knock, to force a smile and pretend I belonged, when a flicker of movement at the edge of the porch caught my eye. I squinted, trying to make sense of it in the fading light. And then I saw him, my grandson, Leo. He was 8 years old, huddled on the cold concrete steps, trying to make himself as small as possible. But there was no escaping the 5-degree air. He was wearing nothing but a thin Spider-Man t-shirt and a pair of athletic shorts. His skin was covered in goosebumps, a raised map of his misery. His bare feet were pressed against the freezing cement, and I could see his lips were tinged with a frightening shade of blue. His whole body was trembling in a violent, uncontrollable rhythm. For a second, my mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe he had just run outside for a moment. But I knew that wasn't true. The defeated way he was sitting, the sheer desperation in his posture told me he had been out there for a long, long time. The sweet potato pie in my hands suddenly felt like a block of ice. The chill of the November air was nothing compared to the Arctic wave that washed through my veins. Inside that house was laughter and warmth. Outside was my grandson Rose's grandson, silently freezing to death, and all that separated them was a pane of glass. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think. I only acted. I walked to the edge of the porch and gently placed Rose's pie on the ground. It was a final farewell to the man who had hoped for a peaceful reunion. Then I turned and walked back to the front door. I didn't knock. I didn't ring the bell. I squared my shoulders, and I threw all the force of a 72-year-old man, fueled by the rage of 1,000 ancestors, into the door. The wood splintered. The lock burst from the frame. The door flew open with a deafening crash, slamming against the inside wall. The silence that followed was absolute. A fork clattered to the floor. Laughter died in their throats. Every head snapped towards me, their faces masks of stunned disbelief. Chloe dropped the wine bottle and the red liquid spread across her pristine white carpet like a spreading wound. "Dad," she stammered, her face a mess of confusion and guilt. "What in God's name are you doing?" I ignored her. I didn't even look at my son, who stood frozen, the carving knife still in his hand, his face a pathetic mix of shock and shame. My eyes cut through them all, seeing nothing but the path to my grandson. I strode into the center of their perfect party, bringing the cold night air in with me. Their guests shrank away as if I were death itself. I didn't stop until I was standing over them, a pillar of ice and fury in their fake warm world. I let my gaze fall on Andre, then on Chloe. Finally I spoke. My voice was not loud, but it was low and heavy, cutting through the stunned silence with the force of a glacier. 6 words. 6 words that brought their world crashing down. My grandson. My house. Right now. And I saw it in their eyes. The instant recognition. This wasn't a request. This was a verdict. I watched the confusion on their faces curdle into pure white-hot terror. They knew they had just lost everything. The silence in the room was a living thing, thick and suffocating. It was broken by the sound of a fork clattering onto a plate. Chloe was the first to find her voice, and when she did, it was dripping with a sickly sweet poison that was meant to sound like reason. She took a step forward, forcing a smile that didn't reach her panicked eyes. "Oh, Daddy Blackwood," she said, her voice a high-pitched performance for her guests. "You gave us such a fright. Honestly, you men and your theatrics." She waved a dismissive hand as if I had merely tracked mud on her precious white carpet. "It's not what it looks like. Leo was just having a little tantrum because he didn't want to eat his vegetables. He was being disruptive and almost woke up baby Ava. We just put him outside for a 2-minute timeout to cool off. We were literally just about to let him back in." I stared at her. I listened to every carefully chosen word, every lie designed to smooth over the jagged edges of her cruelty. A 2-minute timeout. In 5-degree weather, without a coat. I looked at the golden turkey on the table, which had probably been out of the oven for at least half an hour. I looked at the half-empty wine glasses. I looked at the frightened faces of her friends who were desperately trying to look anywhere but at me. I could see the truth in their shame. They had been eating and laughing while my grandson froze. My gaze then shifted to my son Andre. I searched his face for a flicker of the boy I raised, the boy I taught to be honest and strong. I found nothing. He stood there, a hollow man, avoiding my eyes, his knuckles white around the carving knife. He was a coward hiding behind his wife's words. "Dad, just calm down," he mumbled, his voice weak. "Chloe's right. It was just a little discipline. You're overreacting." Overreacting. The word hung in the air, an insult so profound it almost took my breath away. He was defending her. He was choosing this woman, this lie, over his own son. In that moment, the last bit of hope I had for him withered and died. I had lost one son years ago to ambition and greed, but I had only just realized it now. I did not waste my breath arguing with them. To argue would be to validate their fantasy, to suggest that there was a version of reality where their actions were somehow acceptable. Instead, I acted. I walked past them as if they were furniture, my every step deliberate. I could feel Leo shivering on the floor behind me, where he had crawled after I broke down the door. I knelt down on one knee, my old joints protesting. For the first time since entering the house, I spoke in a voice that was not filled with ice and fury. My words were not for them. They were only for Leo. My voice was a whisper, soft and steady. "It's over now, son. Grandpa's here." Leo looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a heartbreaking sliver of hope. He was too cold to even cry properly. I gently scooped him up into my arms. He weighed almost nothing. I could feel the violent tremors of his shivering body against my chest, a frantic rhythm of survival. He buried his face in my neck, his small, frozen hands clutching my shirt. I took off my heavy wool coat and wrapped it around him, cocooning him in its warmth. His small body was swallowed by the fabric. I held him tight, trying to pour my own life's warmth back into him. I stood up with my grandson held securely in my arms. I finally looked at Andre, and Chloe truly looked at them. And I let them see the entirety of my contempt, my disgust. I let them see the end of the road. "You will not call. I said, my voice low and final. You will not text, and you will not come to my house. The next time you see me, it will be with my lawyer. And with that, I turned my back on them and walked out of the wreckage of their perfect Thanksgiving, leaving them to choke on the silence I left behind. As I walked away from that house, the cold of the November night felt less biting than the ice in my own heart. The weight of my grandson Leo in my arms was the only real thing in the world. I opened the passenger door of my old Buick and gently placed him inside. He curled up on the seat, my oversized coat swallowing him whole, and his shivering finally began to subside as the first waves of exhaustion took over. I closed the door, shutting out the sight of my son's perfectly lit house, a monument to a life that had lost its soul. As I got into the driver's seat and started the engine, the quiet hum was a relief after the chaos. I turned the heat up as high as it would go. I drove away without looking back. In the rear-view mirror, I saw my own face, and for a moment I saw the face of a much younger man, a man who believed he had raised his son right. I looked over at Leo, who had finally drifted into a troubled sleep. In the gentle curve of his cheek and the shape of his eyes, I saw my Andre as a boy. But more than that, I saw Rose. My Rose. And that's when the memories came flooding in a tidal wave of a past that felt a million miles away. Rose and I didn't raise our son in a place like that. Our first home was a small 2-bedroom house with a leaky roof and floors that creaked, but it was never cold. Rose filled every corner with warmth, with the smell of baking bread, with laughter that echoed off the walls. She had a saying she repeated like a prayer. Kindness costs you nothing, Silas, she would tell me, her hand in mine. But its value is infinite. Never forget that. I remembered one Thanksgiving years ago when a layoff meant our budget was stretched to the breaking point. We had just enough for a small chicken, not a turkey. But Rose heard that our neighbor, a single mother with 2 kids, had even less. Without a second thought, she cooked our chicken, added some extra potatoes and greens, and we all shared one meal together, crowded around our small kitchen table. That night, Andre learned that abundance wasn't about what you had on your plate, but about how many people you could share it with. I looked at the man standing in that dining room, the man who called my grandson's suffering discipline. Where did that boy go? When did my son trade in his mother's legacy of compassion for a hollow shell of material success? He had married a woman who saw family as a performance and children as accessories, and instead of teaching her his values, he had adopted hers. He had not just let his son down, he had desecrated the memory of his mother. Rose had seen the cracks forming years ago. She saw the way Andre's talk shifted from his passions to his possessions. She saw the subtle condescension in Chloe's eyes when she looked at our simple home and our old furniture. Be careful, Si, Rose had warned me gently one evening long before she got sick. There's a chill setting in around that boy. Make sure he doesn't forget where his warmth comes from. I had brushed it off as a mother's worry. Now I saw it for what it was. It was wisdom. It was foresight. She knew the fight that was coming, even if I didn't. The drive home was quiet, Leo's soft breathing the only sound. But in my mind, I could hear Rose's voice, clear as a bell, speaking her old truth. Kindness costs you nothing. But cruelty. Cruelty would now cost my son everything. And as I pulled into my own driveway, the quiet, humble house that Rose and I had made a home, I knew with absolute certainty exactly what she would expect me to do next. My grief for the son I had lost was now forged into a weapon of absolute resolve. I drove through the quiet suburban streets, the warmth from the car's heater slowly chasing away the chill that had settled deep in my grandson's bones. For the first 10 minutes, Leo was silent, curled up in my wool coat, asleep from sheer emotional and physical exhaustion. In that quiet, my mind had drifted swimming in memories of Rose and the son I thought I'd raised. But as we turned onto the main highway, a small whimper from the passenger seat pulled me back to the present. Leo was awake. He sat up slowly, the big coat falling away from his shoulders. He looked around, his eyes wide with the disorientation of a soldier waking up far from the battlefield. He saw the familiar dashboard of my Buick. Then he looked at me. Recognition dawned, followed by a wave of fear. His first words were a whisper so quiet I almost didn't hear them over the hum of the engine. Is she mad at me? The question struck me with the force of a physical blow. Not, am I safe? Not, where are we going? But is she mad at me? His first instinct was to assume blame. That's what they had done to him. They had trained him to believe that cruelty was a consequence he had earned. I reached over and put my hand on his small shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "No, Leo," I said, my voice firm but soft. "She is not mad at you, and it doesn't matter if she is. You did nothing wrong. You are safe. You are with me." He seemed to consider this for a moment as if the concept of his own innocence was a foreign language he was trying to understand. A single tear rolled down his cheek, then another. She said I was being a bad boy." He sobbed, the words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. "I just wanted to see the baby. Ava was sleeping and I just peeked in her room. I was quiet. I promise I was quiet. But she said I was too loud and that I would make Ava sick. She said I was selfish." I kept my eyes on the road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I could feel a cold, clean rage building inside me, but my voice remained calm for him. "Has she done this before Leo sent you outside?" He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Sometimes," he said, "when I get a bad grade or when I spill something, or when Dad is working late, she sends me to my room with no dinner. The porch is new. The porch is new." He said it like a simple fact, but to me it was a terrifying escalation. He took a shaky breath and continued. "It's been different since Ava came. Everything I do is wrong. She says I'm too rough, too noisy. She says I take up too much space." He looked down at his hands. "Last month it was my birthday. She made a big cake, but then she said I didn't deserve any because I hadn't cleaned my room perfectly. I had to sit at the table and watch everyone else eat it. I felt my heart crack. The cruelty was not random. It was systematic, a slow and deliberate breaking of a child's spirit. I had to know the final, most important piece. "Leo," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "what does your dad do when she does these things?" Leo didn't answer right away. He just shrugged, a gesture of complete and utter defeat that no 8-year-old should ever know. He says Chloe is stressed with the baby," Leo mumbled. "He says I should just try harder to be good. He says I need to listen to her so we can all be a happy family." And there it was, the final unforgivable betrayal. My son had not been a passive bystander. He had been an accomplice. He had chosen his wife's comfort over his son's safety. He had actively taught his child that love was conditional and that his suffering was his own fault. The last embers of sympathy I had for Andre were extinguished, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the old leather groaning under the pressure. I was no longer just a grandfather saving his grandson. I was an instrument of justice, a force of nature that was about to correct a profound and terrible imbalance. We finally pulled into my driveway. I turned off the engine, and in the sudden silence I turned to my grandson. I put my hand on his cheek, making him look at me. "Leo," I said, and my voice held the weight of an unbreakable oath. "That is not a happy family. What you just left is not a home. This," I said, gesturing to my small, simple house, "this is a home, and you are safe here now. I am never going to let her or anyone hurt you ever again. Do you understand me?" Through his tears, he gave a small, determined nod. "Yes, Grandpa." As we walked up to the front door, I knew this was more than just a temporary refuge. It was the beginning of a war, and it was a war I had no intention of losing. I unlocked the door to my house, and the familiar scent of old books, lemon polish, and a lifetime of memories wrapped around us like a warm blanket. This was the house I had brought my own son Andre home to. This was the house where Rose had measured his height in pencil marks on a door frame that I refused to ever paint over. It was not a mansion. It was a home. And as I led Leo inside, I felt like I was bringing him into a sanctuary, a place where the ghosts were kind and the walls were built with love, not money. Leo looked around, his small face filled with a quiet awe. He seemed to relax instantly, the tension draining from his little shoulders. The first thing I did was run him a warm bath. As the tub filled with steam, I found a set of old pajamas in a chest in the guest room. They were soft from countless washings of faded blue flannel with little rocket ships on them. They had been Andre's. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. I laid the pajamas on the bed and went to check on the bath. When I came back, Leo was standing by the bed, his thin Spider-Man t-shirt and shorts now in a sad little pile on the floor. He was turned away from me, and that's when I saw it. My world, which had already been cracked and shattered, broke completely. Across the delicate skin of his back was a long, ugly mark, a yellowish-purple bruise that could only have come from being struck with something. My breath caught in my throat. I must have made a sound because he flinched and tried to turn to hide. As he moved, I saw more. A constellation of older, faded bruises on his ribs, and then on his upper arm a mark so clear, so undeniable that it made my blood run cold, the distinct, cruel shape of an adult's fingerprints pressed into his skin with terrible force. The rage I felt in my son's house was a wildfire, hot and chaotic. This was different. This was the cold, silent vacuum of space. The anger was so pure, so absolute, it became perfectly calm. Every excuse Chloe had made, every weak defense from my son, evaporated into nothing. This was not discipline. This was not a timeout. This was violence. This was the evidence of a slow, secret war being waged against a defenseless child. Leo saw the look on my face, and his own filled with shame the way a victim is so often taught to feel. "It's okay, Grandpa," he whispered, trying to pull the pajama shirt on to cover himself. "It doesn't hurt anymore." I knelt in front of him, my movement steady, betraying none of the earthquake happening inside me. I looked him right in the eye. "It's not okay, Leo," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable. "And you don't have to pretend it is. Not here. Not with me." After his bath, I tucked him into the guest bed, the same bed Andre used to sleep in. I sat with him until his breathing evened out and he fell into a deep, protected sleep. Then I went back to the bathroom. I picked up his discarded t-shirt and shorts and I folded them. It was a simple act, but it felt heavy with meaning. I was not just cleaning up, I was collecting evidence. Back in my study under the warm glow of my desk lamp, the gentle grandfather receded, and the engineer, the planner, the fighter took his place. The hot, heartbroken anger was gone. In its place was something far more dangerous, a methodical, ice-cold certainty. I took out my phone. I didn't look up Andre's number to scream at him. That would be a waste of energy. Instead, I opened the camera. After Leo was sound asleep, I had gone back into the room, and with the gentlest touch I had taken clear, undeniable pictures of every single bruise. Now I sat at my desk and looked at them, cataloging the cruelty. I opened a fresh notebook, the kind I used to use for building plans, and I began to write. I wrote down the date and the time. I wrote down everything Leo had told me in the car, every detail about the punishments, the missed birthday cake, his father's complicity. I wrote down a precise description of the marks on his body. I was no longer just a grandfather. I was building a case brick by methodical brick. My house was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the same clock that had ticked in my son's house. But here it didn't sound like an accusation. It sounded like a countdown to justice. I looked at a framed photo of Rose on my desk, her smile as warm and bright as ever. The war had begun the moment I kicked in that door. But now, sitting in the quiet of my home with my evidence laid out before me, I had just drawn up the battle plans. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I would not be the one to lose. I sat at my desk for a long time, the house wrapped in a profound silence. The only light was the small lamp that cast a golden glow on the notebook in front of me and the terrible, damning photos on my phone screen. Leo was asleep down the hall, safe for the first time in what felt like a very long time. In the stillness, I was mapping out the path ahead, a path of doctors and lawyers, a path of righteous, necessary conflict. And then my phone buzzed, a harsh, intrusive sound that shattered the peace. I glanced at the screen. It was Andre, the first volley in a battle he didn't even know he was about to lose. The text read, "Dad, this is crazy. You can't just take my son. Bring him home right now so we can talk about this like a family." I read the words, "like a family," and a humorless smile touched my lips. I set the phone down on the desk screen up and did not reply. A minute later, it buzzed again and again. The assault had begun. The messages started as a performance of wounded concern, a carefully scripted play designed to paint me as the villain, the unstable old man who had lost his mind. Chloe's texts were the most theatrical. "Silas, please, I am worried sick. Is Leo okay? I know I can be harsh sometimes. I was just so stressed with the party and the baby. I love Leo like he's my own. You have to know that." I picked up my phone and looked at the picture of the fingerprint-shaped bruise on my grandson's arm. I compared the image to her words. The lie was so vast, so shameless, it was almost impressive. Another message from her appeared. He needs to be in his own bed, Silas. He needs his mother. You're scaring him. You're scaring all of us by acting this way. Please just bring him home. Her words were like arrows tipped with false sentiment designed to find some weak spot, some lingering sense of guilt in me. But there was none left. My heart was now shielded by the cold, hard evidence of her abuse. They were not worried about Leo. They were worried about the consequences. They were worried that the perfect picture they had painted for the world was about to be torn to shreds. I watched the phone, a detached observer at a train wreck. I felt nothing but a cold, analytical calm. Every message they sent was another brick in the wall of their own prison. When their performance of concern failed to get a response, the tone began to shift. The sweet poison was replaced by raw, desperate threats. The real Andre the weak man, hiding behind bluster, finally showed his face. Dad, I am warning you right now. If you don't answer this phone, I am calling the police. I'll tell them you've kidnapped my son. I'll tell them you're senile. How do you think that's going to look? A kidnapping charge. It was a foolish, desperate move. A move that would invite official scrutiny, the very thing he should have been terrified of. Then came Chloe's true voice, sharp and venomous. You have no legal right to do this. We are his parents. You are an old man who just broke into our home. We will take you to court. You will be declared mentally unfit, and I swear to God, you will never see Leo again. I read her threat, and for the first time that night, I almost laughed. She was threatening me with the very battleground I was preparing to conquer. She thought the law was her weapon, when in reality, it was about to be her executioner. They were panicking. They were making mistakes. They were creating a beautiful time-stamped record of their own instability, their guilt, and their willingness to use threats to get what they want. It was a gift. The final message was from Andre, a single pathetic line. You are destroying this family, Dad. I looked at that message. I thought of my grandson sleeping peacefully in the other room, finally free from their idea of family. I had not destroyed it. I had merely exposed the truth of what it had become, and now I was going to save what was left. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't text back. I didn't block their numbers. I did something far more powerful. I pressed and held the power button, and I watched as the screen filled with their frantic, hateful words went completely black. The buzzing stopped. The house was silent once more. But this was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of absolute control. The next morning I woke before the sun. I moved through the quiet house, my movements slow and deliberate. Leo was still asleep, a small, peaceful lump under a mountain of blankets. For the first time in what I suspected was a very long time, he was not in a state of fear. He was simply at rest. I made a pot of strong black coffee the way Rose used to like it and sat at my kitchen table. I opened my notebook, reviewing the neat, angry lines I had written the night before. Then I turned my phone back on. It came to life with a desperate buzzing shudder. A flood of notifications poured in. 37 missed calls from Andre, 22 from Chloe. A long, scrolling list of texts filled with panicked accusations and hollow apologies. I read none of them. They were irrelevant now, the desperate cries of people who had already lost. I scrolled to my contacts and found the one I needed. The phone rang twice before he picked up. His voice was awake and sharp even at this early hour. David Carter. David, it's Silas, I said. There was no need for pleasantries. He knew my voice, and he would know from my tone that this was not a social call. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, a silence of understanding between two men who had known each other for 40 years. It's time, I said. It happened. Another pause, this one heavy with resignation. I was afraid this day would come, David said, his voice laced with a grim sadness. I'll clear my morning. Get to the office as soon as you can. And Silas, don't speak to either of them. I hung up the phone. The first move on the chessboard had been made. An hour later, I was sitting across from David in his office. The room was a fortress of order surrounded by walls of leather-bound law books that smelled of paper and time. It was the complete opposite of the emotional chaos of the last 12 hours. David Carter was more than my lawyer. He was my friend. He had been the best man at my wedding to Rose. He was one of the few people on earth who understood the foundation upon which my life had been built. I didn't begin with my anger or my sorrow. I began with the facts the way an engineer lays out a blueprint. I placed my notebook on his polished mahogany desk and slid my phone across to him, open to the gallery of photos I had taken of Leo's bruises. David picked up the phone, his face impassive. He swiped through the images, his jaw tightening with each picture. His professional calm was a thin veneer over the fury of a friend. He put the phone down gently. "Good God, Silas," he whispered. "Tell me everything." And so I did. I told him about the drive, the pie, the picture-perfect scene in the window. I described finding Leo on the porch, his confession in the car, the discovery of the bruises. I spoke calmly, my voice even presenting the evidence as if in a courtroom. When I finished, David leaned back in his chair, his eyes hard. "They left a child outside in freezing temperatures, and they have been physically abusing him," he stated, not as a question but as a final damning conclusion. "This goes beyond mere cruelty. This is criminal." He stood up and walked over to a large fireproof filing cabinet. He returned with a thick, heavy binder. On the spine in gold letters were the words, "The Blackwood Legacy Trust." He placed it on the desk between us with a heavy thud. "Rose was a brilliant woman, Silas," David said, opening the binder. "She was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else." My mind went back to the day we signed these papers almost 10 years ago now. Andre had just married Chloe. Rose and I were happy for him, but Rose had a sliver of apprehension she couldn't shake. "She's a taker, see," Rose had told me one night, "and she's teaching our son to be the same. We need to protect what we built, not for us, for our grandchildren." At the time, I thought she was being overly cautious. Now I saw her for what she was, a protector, a matriarch who saw the future with a mother's piercing clarity. David explained the structure we had so carefully built. "As you know," he began, "the trust is the legal owner of the house Andre and Chloe live in. The deed is in the trust's name. The trust is also the primary silent partner in Andre's marketing firm, the source of the seed money he used to start it. He is the beneficiary of these assets, allowed to live in the home and draw a salary so long as he fulfills his duties as outlined in the agreement." He flipped through several pages, his finger tracing down a line of text. "And here," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "here is Rose's masterpiece. Section C, Article 4. The clause she refused to compromise on. The Family Wellness and Protection Clause." He turned the binder around so I could read it, even though I knew the words by heart. I remembered Rose dictating them to him, her voice full of fierce love and unwavering principle. David read the key passage aloud, his voice resonating with the power of the law. "The primary and non-negotiable duty of the beneficiary is to provide a physically and emotionally safe, nurturing, and abuse-free environment for all minor dependents residing in the property. Any act of physical abuse, endangerment, or severe emotional neglect, as determined by the trustee with supporting evidence, shall constitute a fundamental and irreparable breach of this trust." He looked up at me, his eyes grim. "A fundamental and irreparable breach," he repeated. "According to the terms Rose laid out, a breach of this clause doesn't just give you grounds to warn him, Silas. It gives you the immediate unilateral power to void his beneficiary status entirely." The words hung in the air, a death sentence to the life my son had built on a foundation of lies and cruelty. The trap that my wise, loving Rose had set all those years ago was now ready to be sprung. "So what's the next step?" I asked, my voice steady. David closed the binder. "The next step is to follow the plan. First, you're taking Leo to a doctor this afternoon for a full medical evaluation. We need an official report. Second, I will draft a formal notice of breach. We will schedule a meeting with them here in this office. They will walk in here thinking this is a negotiation about custody. They will believe they hold all the cards. They will walk out with nothing but the clothes on their backs." A grim satisfaction settled over me. This was not just about revenge. This was about honoring a promise I had made to my wife to protect the family she loved more than life itself. The path forward was clear, paved with the ink of her foresight and the steel of my resolve. The days leading up to the meeting were a strange mixture of calm and coiled tension. I took Leo to see Dr. Evans, a kind, gentle woman who had been his pediatrician since he was a baby. I didn't have to say much. The medical report she produced was a cold, clinical document that spoke volumes. It detailed malnutrition, hypothermic exposure, and cataloged every single bruise with precise medical terminology. It was a formal, undeniable record of their neglect and violence. While I focused on creating a bubble of safety and normalcy for Leo, we baked cookies, watched old movies, and he even started to laugh again, a sound I realized I hadn't truly heard in years. David was busy preparing the battlefield. He had a private investigator verify the extent of Andre's financial dependence on the trust, confirming that without its backing, his company would collapse within a month. Every piece of the puzzle was being locked into place. Finally, the day arrived. David had summoned them to his office for a 10 a.m. meeting under the pretense of discussing the terms of Leo's temporary guardianship and future family arrangements. They had agreed immediately, no doubt seeing it as their first opportunity to legally assert their parental rights and paint me as an interfering, senile old fool. I was already in the conference room when they arrived, sitting beside David at the head of a long, polished table. The room was designed to be intimidating with its high ceiling and a large window that looked out over the city but offered no comfort. They walked in, and the shift in atmosphere was immediate. Chloe was dressed in an expensive-looking pantsuit, her face a carefully composed mask of wronged motherhood. Andre looked tired and angry, his suit doing little to hide the nervous energy radiating from him. They took the seats opposite us, a clear line drawn in the sand. Chloe was the first to speak, her voice sharp and accusatory. "All right, Silas, this has gone on long enough. We are here to take our son home. We have been more than patient, but your little stunt is over." Andre nodded, trying to look authoritative. "Our lawyer will be here any minute," he said, bluffing. "He's advised us that what you did constitutes kidnapping." David didn't even flinch. He simply slid 3 folders across the table. One for Andre, one for Chloe, and one for their imaginary lawyer. "There will be no need for that," David said, his voice calm and dangerously level. "Everything you need to understand your current situation is in these folders. I suggest you open them." Chloe scoffed, but opened the folder anyway. Andre followed suit. The first page they saw was a copy of Dr. Evans's medical report. I watched their faces as they read. Chloe's mask of composure began to crack, a flicker of panic in her eyes. Andre's face went pale. He couldn't dismiss this. This wasn't just my word against theirs. This was a professional medical diagnosis. Chloe slammed the report down on the table. "This is absurd. Kids get bruises. He's an active boy. This is a complete exaggeration." David ignored her outburst and directed his attention to my son. "Andre," he said, his tone shifting from professional to personal, a subtle reminder of the decades he had known him. "Before your mother passed, she and your father took great care to plan for the future. For your future and for your children's future. You were there when the Blackwood Legacy Trust was established. You signed the documents." Andre shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Of course I did. It was my inheritance." "No," David said, his voice cutting through Andre's arrogance. "That is your first and most critical misunderstanding. It was not your inheritance. It was the family's legacy. You were not made the owner, you were made the beneficiary. And your status as beneficiary was contingent on certain responsibilities." He gestured to the folders. "Please turn to the next document." It was a summary of the trust's holdings, the deed to their house, the initial investment capital for Andre's company, a portfolio of stocks that provided a steady passive income. I watched Andre's eyes scan the page, a dawning horror on his face, as the reality of his position began to sink in. He wasn't the king of his own castle. He was a tenant. "And now," David continued, his voice low and deliberate, "we come to the heart of the matter. Please turn to Section C, Article 4. We call it the Rose Clause." He let the name hang in the air for a moment, a tribute to the woman who had orchestrated this from beyond the grave. "Your mother insisted on its inclusion. She had a unique gift for seeing the potential in people, Andre, and for seeing the potential for failure." He slid his own copy across the table, his finger pointing to a specific paragraph. "The Family Wellness and Protection Clause." David read, his voice clear and resonant, states that the primary duty of the beneficiary is to provide a, and I quote, "physically and emotionally safe, nurturing, and abuse-free environment for all minor dependents." It goes on to state that any act of physical abuse, endangerment, or severe emotional neglect shall constitute a fundamental and irreparable breach of the trust. I watched Chloe's face. She was starting to connect the dots, her mind racing, searching for a loophole that didn't exist. "What does that even mean?" she snapped. "That's just sentimental legal jargon." "On the contrary," David said, a hint of steel in his voice, "it is the most legally binding clause in the entire document. It is the one your mother made non-negotiable." He then picked up the medical report. "This document here detailing hypothermic exposure constitutes endangerment. He picked up my phone and slid it across the table, displaying a clear photo of the fingerprint bruises on Leo's arm. And this, Mr. Blackwood, constitutes physical abuse. Andre stared at the photo of his son's bruised arm, and for the first time I saw a flicker of genuine shame. But it was too little, far too late. David leaned forward, the finality of his next words sealing their fate. The Rose Clause is not a warning system. It is a tripwire. And on Thanksgiving Day, you didn't just stumble over it. You ran through it at full speed. By the legal terms of the trust that you signed, your actions have triggered an immediate and irreversible voiding of your status as beneficiary. Chloe let out a sound that was half a laugh, half a sob. You can't do that. You can't just throw us out of our own house. But it was never your house, Ms. Vance, David said calmly. It has always belonged to the trust. And the trust's primary mission as laid out by Rose Blackwood is to protect its children. So yes, we can. And we are. He then laid out the consequences, each one a hammer blow to the life they had built. As of this moment, you have 30 days to vacate the property. The trust's investment in your company is hereby frozen, and all lines of credit are terminated. And finally, based on this evidence, he tapped the medical report, we will be filing for emergency full legal and physical custody of Leo Blackwood effective immediately. Your parental rights will be challenged in court, and I assure you we will win. He leaned back, his work done. The trap had been sprung. The plan so carefully laid out by my wife years ago had been executed to perfection. I looked at my son and his wife. I saw their perfect world, their expensive clothes, their smug sense of entitlement all dissolving into dust around them. They had built their life on a foundation of cruelty, and my Rose, my wise, wonderful Rose, had just pulled the foundation out from under them. The day after my meeting with David was quiet. Too quiet. I knew the silence was temporary, the eerie calm before a storm. I spent the morning with Leo trying to build a small island of normalcy for him in a sea of chaos. We sat at the kitchen table working on a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle of the Grand Canyon, a puzzle Rose and I had never finished. Leo was focused, his small brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to fit a piece of blue sky into the vast landscape. For a few hours we were just a grandfather and his grandson, and the world outside my front door ceased to exist. But the world has a way of reminding you it's still there. The peace was shattered by the sound of a car door slamming shut with enough force to rattle our windows. It was followed by the angry crunch of footsteps on the gravel path leading to my porch. I didn't have to look. I knew who it was. I placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. "Hey, champ," I said, my voice calm and even. "I need you to go up to the guest room and finish that book we started. Can you do that for me?" He looked up, his eyes wide with the familiar flicker of fear. He had heard the car, too. "It's okay," I reassured him, giving his shoulder a squeeze. "Grandpa's got this. You are safe in this house. Nothing is going to happen to you." He nodded and scurried out of the room, his trust in me a precious weight I was determined to honor. A furious pounding began on the front door, hard enough to shake the old wood in its frame. I took a deep, steadying breath and walked to the door. I didn't open it right away. I looked through the peephole. It was Andre and Chloe, their faces twisted into masks of self-righteous rage. This was not the visit of concerned parents. This was an ambush. I unlocked and opened the door, but I did not step aside. I filled the doorway with my body, a silent, unmovable barrier. Chloe lunged forward, her voice a shrill command. "This has gone on long enough, Silas. The games are over. We are here for our son." Andre, emboldened by his wife's aggression, tried to push past me. "Get out of the way, old man. You have no right to keep him from us. We're his parents." I stood my ground, my feet planted firmly on the floor of the home I had built. I looked at my son, at this stranger wearing his face, and I felt nothing but a profound and sorrowful pity. They still didn't understand. They still thought this was a battle of wills, a shouting match they could win through intimidation. They believed that the words, "We are his parents," were a magic incantation that absolved them of all sin and granted them absolute power. "You are not welcome here," I said, my voice low and devoid of emotion. "You are not coming into this house. You need to leave." My calmness seemed to enrage them even more. Chloe's face turned a blotchy red. "You can't do this. We will call the police. We'll have you arrested for kidnapping, you senile old fool." Andre jabbed a finger in my face. She's right. We're calling the cops. You'll be in a jail cell by tonight. They were throwing threats like stones, hoping one would strike a nerve. They wanted me to yell to argue to get dragged down into the mud with them. They wanted a fight. I had no intention of giving them one. I looked at them, my expression unreadable. You want to call the police? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. That's your plan. Andre puffed out his chest. You're damn right it is. I gave a small, slow nod. All right. There's no need for you to waste your time. I'll do it for you. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Their smug, angry expressions faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. This wasn't part of their script. I turned the phone so they could see the screen, and I calmly dialed 911. Yes, hello, I said into the phone, my voice perfectly level. I'd like to report a disturbance at my residence. My son and his wife are on my property. They are trespassing and are refusing to leave. I paused as the dispatcher asked a question. No weapons. But they are becoming increasingly aggressive and are disturbing the peace. Yes, I'll hold. I lowered the phone and looked at their stunned faces. The color had drained from their cheeks. Their power play had just been turned against them with 3 simple numbers. They had come to my home to create a scene, and I was now officially documenting it. The 10 minutes we waited for the police to arrive felt like an eternity. They stood on my lawn fuming in silence, their rage now mixed with a healthy dose of uncertainty. They had lost control of the narrative. 2 uniformed officers, a man and a woman, finally pulled up in their patrol car. They were professional, their faces calm and unreadable. They approached Andre and Chloe first, who immediately launched into a frantic, overlapping story about how I, their elderly and unstable father, had stolen their child and was refusing to let them see him. I watched the officers listen patiently, their eyes occasionally glancing over at me standing calmly in my doorway. After a few minutes, the male officer held up a hand, silencing them. He walked over to me. Sir, he said respectfully, can you tell me what's going on here? I did not show him the photos. I did not mention the abuse. David's advice had been clear: keep it simple. Let them be the emotional, unstable ones. Officer, I said calmly, this is my home. My grandson Leo is staying with me at the moment. His parents, my son and his wife, arrived uninvited and are causing a disturbance. I have asked them to leave my property and they have refused. It is a family matter that is being handled by our respective lawyers. All I am asking is for them to leave peacefully. The officer looked at me, then back at the frantic couple on the lawn, and I could see him making a judgment. He saw a hysterical pair and a calm, rational old man. He nodded slowly. He walked back over to Andre and Chloe. Folks, he said, his voice now firm and official, this is a civil matter, a custody dispute. It needs to be handled by the courts, not by shouting on someone's front lawn. This man has the right to ask you to leave his property. If you do not leave immediately, he can press charges for trespassing. I suggest you get in your car and let your lawyers handle it from here. The look of utter defeat on their faces was a sight to behold. They had been publicly dismissed. Their authority, which they believed was absolute, had just been declared null and void by the very system they had tried to weaponize. Defeated and humiliated, they got in their car and sped away, kicking up gravel in their wake. I watched them go. They thought they could win with anger and intimidation. I had just forced them onto my battlefield, and on that field, the law was my weapon and the truth was my shield. I sat beside David in the conference room, the silence between us comfortable and heavy with shared purpose. The room was on the 12th floor, and through the large window the city bustled with a life that felt a world away from the quiet gravity within these 4 walls. On the polished table in front of us were 3 simple manila folders. They looked innocent enough, but I knew they were not. They were bombs filled with meticulously gathered facts and the legal dynamite of my late wife's foresight. I felt no nervousness, no anxiety. All the hot, chaotic emotions of the past week had been burned away, leaving only a cold, clear sense of resolve. I was here to do a job, a painful but necessary task that had been a long time coming. This was not an act of anger. It was an act of order. The door opened and they walked in. The temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. Chloe led the way, as I knew she would. She was dressed in a sharp, dark pantsuit, her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull the skin taut around her eyes. She carried a designer handbag like a weapon, and her face was set in a mask of defiant indignation. She looked like a woman marching into a negotiation she was certain she would win. Andre followed a half-step behind her, a shadow trying to project the authority of the person he was following. He wore an expensive suit, a uniform of success that now looked like a costume on a man who was utterly lost. He refused to look at me, instead directing a hostile glare at David as if this were all a lawyer's trick and not a consequence of his own making. "Let's get this over with," Chloe said, her voice sharp and brittle, foregoing any greeting. "We have a busy schedule, and this little family drama has taken up quite enough of our time." She and Andre took the seats on the opposite side of the table, a clear line of battle drawn between us. Andre leaned forward, puffing out his chest in a sad imitation of power. "Before we begin," he said, his voice a little too loud, "I want to make it clear that we know our rights. My father's actions breaking into our home, taking our son, are illegal. We have been advised to press charges, and we will." I watched my son perform, and I felt a profound sense of sorrow. He was still playing a game he didn't understand, reading from a script that had long since been rendered meaningless. He thought this was about parental rights and emotional leverage. He had no idea this was about contracts and consequences. David, to his credit, didn't even blink. He simply gestured to the folders in front of them with an open palm. "Everything will be made clear," he said, his voice the calm center of the storm they had brought into the room. "All we ask is that you listen." His composure seemed to unnerve them more than any argument could have. They had come prepared for a fight, for yelling for tears. They were not prepared for this quiet, methodical dismantling of their world. I looked at them, at their expensive clothes and their shared expressions of entitlement, and I knew I was seeing them clearly for the very last time. In a few moments, the ground would give way beneath their feet, and they would never be these people again. The storm was no longer coming. It was here, in this room, waiting silently inside 3 manila folders. David let the silence in the room stretch for a long moment, allowing their arrogance and accusations to hang in the air like a foul odor. Then he calmly slid the folders toward the center of the table. "Everything you believe to be true about your situation is incorrect," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the immense weight of the law. "Your rights, your assets, and your future were all defined by a set of documents you signed years ago, documents I suspect you never truly bothered to read. Let's start with the first page." I watched as Chloe flipped open the folder with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Andre followed his movements, more hesitant. The first thing they saw was the cool, typed-out summary of Dr. Evans's medical report. Chloe scanned it, her expression of contempt slowly faltering. "Malnutrition, hypothermic exposure, multiple contusions," she read aloud in a mocking whisper, then looked up, a sneer on her face. "Oh, please, this is ridiculous. He's a clumsy boy, he doesn't like to eat his peas, and he had a little time out. This is a pathetic attempt to—" "Please, turn to the next page," David interrupted, his voice cutting cleanly through her denial. The next page contained a series of high-resolution color photographs. The pictures I had taken. The ugly yellowing bruise on Leo's back. The unmistakable shape of a handprint wrapped around his small arm. I watched Andre's face as he stared at the photos. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a pasty gray pallor. He looked like he was going to be sick. He had seen the bruises before, of course, but he had seen them through a filter of denial, through his wife's minimizing excuses. Here, in the harsh clinical light of a legal proceeding, they were undeniable artifacts of cruelty. Chloe slammed the folder shut. "This is a violation of our privacy. You had no right to take these." "I had every right to document the injuries on my grandson while he was in my care," I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was low and steady, and it made them both flinch. "Injuries he sustained while in yours." David slid another document forward. "This is a transcript of a conversation I had with Leo with his grandfather present. In it, he details numerous instances of being locked in his room, of being denied meals as punishment, and of his father telling him to simply listen to Chloe when he tried to ask for help." David looked directly at my son. "Is that accurate, Andre? Is that the advice you gave your son?" Andre could only stare at the table, his jaw working silently. He had been rendered speechless by the simple, terrible truth. Chloe, however, was a cornered animal, and she came out fighting. "You are twisting a child's words. This is insane. We are his parents. We have every right to discipline our own child." David held up a hand. "You are correct," he said, a statement that briefly brought a triumphant smirk to Chloe's face. "You do have the right to discipline, but you do not have the right to abuse. And that distinction is the entire reason we are here today." He leaned back in his chair. Which brings us to the final document in your folder, the Blackwood Legacy Trust. I saw Andre's eyes flicker with a spark of hope. He likely thought the trust was his ace in the hole, the source of his wealth and power. He was about to learn that it was in fact his cage. Your father and I are going to have a long talk about my inheritance after this, Andre said, trying to regain some footing. My mother would be horrified by what he is doing. My heart ached at his words. The desecration of her memory was the cruelest cut of all. Your mother, I said, my voice resonating with a sorrow he could not comprehend, is the reason this is happening. David opened his own copy of the trust. Andre, your mother was the wisest person I ever knew, he said gently. She saw the world with a clarity that was sometimes frightening, and she was worried. She saw your ambition, but she also saw how easily you were swayed by the superficial. She worried that you might one day value things more than people. So with your father, she built a firewall, a safety net not for you, but for your children. He found the page he was looking for. The Family Wellness and Protection Clause, David announced, or as we called it, the Rose Clause. Your mother wrote most of it herself. Allow me to read the most relevant passage. He cleared his throat. The primary and non-negotiable duty of the beneficiary is to provide a physically and emotionally safe, nurturing, and abuse-free environment for all minor dependents. Any act of physical abuse, endangerment, or severe emotional neglect as determined by the trustee with supporting evidence shall constitute a fundamental and irreparable breach of this trust. Chloe let out a sharp, derisive laugh. A breach of trust? What are you going to do, give him a slap on the wrist? Cut his allowance? The arrogance was breathtaking. She still had no idea. David looked at her, and for the first time I saw a flicker of pity in his eyes. Ms. Vance, he said, the Rose Clause is not a behavioral guideline. It is the core of the entire agreement. It is the load-bearing wall of this entire structure, and a fundamental and irreparable breach does not come with a warning. It comes with a complete and total system failure. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room, and then he passed sentence. As a direct result of your breach of the Rose Clause documented by the evidence before you, your status as beneficiary of the Blackwood Legacy Trust is hereby and immediately voided. Chloe stared at him, her laughing smile frozen on her face. What? She whispered. David continued, his voice calm and methodical, listing the consequences like a coroner listing the cause of death. 1. The property at 125 Maple Lane is an asset of the trust. As you no longer have beneficiary rights, you are required to vacate the premises within 30 days. Chloe's jaw dropped. The color drained from her face. You're kicking us out of our home, she stammered. 2. David went on, ignoring her. The seed capital and all subsequent financial support for Andre Blackwood marketing were provided by the trust. As of this moment, that support is terminated. All lines of credit are frozen. All accounts are recalled. Now it was Andre's turn. He looked as if he had been punched in the gut. He shook his head slowly, a look of utter disbelief on his face. My company, he whispered. It's gone. And 3, David said, delivering the final, most devastating blow. Given the undeniable evidence of endangerment and physical abuse, the trust's primary mission is now the protection of its sole remaining minor beneficiary, Leo Blackwood. We will be filing a petition for emergency full legal and physical custody. Your parental rights will be challenged, and based on this evidence, you will lose. That was it. The final bomb had dropped. The room was silent save for the sound of Chloe's ragged, panicked breathing. She stared at David, then at me, her eyes wild with a fury that was rapidly being consumed by terror. No, she said, her voice a rising shriek. No, you can't do this. This is our life. We'll sue you. We'll sue both of you. We'll tell everyone what you've done. Andre didn't speak. He just sat there, broken, his entire world demolished in the space of 5 minutes. He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading, searching for the father he had long since abandoned. He was looking for a lifeline, but I had none to give. I met his gaze, and I let him see not anger, but a profound and bottomless sorrow. He had not just lost a house or a company. He had lost his son. He had lost his father. And he had lost the last fading echo of his mother's love. They had come into this room ready for a fight, But this was never a fight. It was an execution planned years ago by the woman he had so carelessly forgotten. Quiet. Onggia Fongdo, Jem Tui Chin Hin Tin Trin Tu Dui. I did not seek victory, only justice. And with justice comes consequences. 30 days after the meeting in David's office, the deadline for them to vacate the house arrived. I had no desire to see them, no need to witness their fall. My focus was entirely on Leo, who was beginning to heal in the quiet safety of my home. But on that 30th day, I found myself driving my old Buick, taking a familiar turn without a conscious command from me. I told myself I just needed to see that the chapter was truly closed, that the house that had been a place of such misery for my grandson was finally empty. I parked down the street, hidden by the shade of a large oak tree. The house that had once been a pristine symbol of their success now looked tired and defeated. The lawn was overgrown, and a cheap, rusted moving truck was parked awkwardly in the driveway, a far cry from the professional movers they would have once hired. The curb was piled high with a chaotic mountain of their lives. Expensive leather sofas, designer clothes spilling from cardboard boxes, high-end kitchen appliances. It looked less like a move and more like an eviction, an unceremonious dumping of a life that had been built on a rotten foundation. Then I saw them. They were not a team working together to face their new reality. They were two separate islands of bitterness and blame. Chloe was pacing back and forth on the lawn, yelling into her phone, her voice a shrill, angry buzz that I could hear even from a distance. She looked haggard, the mask of polished perfection completely gone, replaced by the raw, ugly face of desperation. Andre was hauling boxes out of the house, his movements slow and mechanical, like a man walking in his sleep. He looked smaller, diminished the expensive suit he wore in David's office, replaced by sweatpants and a stained t-shirt. He looked like what he was, a broken man. At one point, Chloe snapped her phone shut and barked an order at him. He didn't answer. He just stopped, dropped the box he was holding with a heavy thud, and gave her a look of pure, undiluted hatred. In that single glance, I saw the entirety of their relationship crumble. Their partnership had been a business transaction built on ambition and greed. Now that the assets had been liquidated, there was nothing left but the debt of their shared cruelty. There was no love to sustain them, no loyalty to bind them. There was only blame. I felt no joy as I watched them, no triumphant satisfaction. There was only a profound and heavy sadness. I was not watching a victory. I was watching a funeral, the funeral of a family that could have been the funeral of a son I no longer knew. They had built a beautiful house, but they had never made it a home. And now all their beautiful things were just a pile of expensive trash on a dying lawn. Rose had always known that a family built without a foundation of kindness would eventually collapse under its own weight. I hadn't been the wrecking ball that destroyed their lives. I had simply held up a mirror and they had been shattered by their own reflection. I put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the ashes of their life behind me, the scene shrinking in my rearview mirror until it was gone. With the storm of the past now behind us, a new kind of quiet settled into my home. It wasn't the empty silence of a lonely old man, but a peaceful, purposeful quiet. It was the quiet of healing. Life with Leo fell into a gentle rhythm. We had breakfast together every morning, him telling me about his dreams, me telling him stories about his father when he was a boy, the good stories from before the world had changed him. I would drive him to his new school, and in the afternoons we would sit at the kitchen table and tackle his homework together. In the beginning, the wounds he carried were invisible but profound. He was a ghost in my house, moving quietly, speaking in whispers, as if he was afraid of taking up too much space. If I moved too quickly or raised my voice to call him from the other room, he would flinch, his small body tensing in anticipation of a blow or a harsh word. My heart broke every time it happened. I made it my mission to fill the house with so much gentleness that it would leave no room for those old fears. The healing didn't happen all at once. It happened in small, almost imperceptible moments. It was the first time I reached out to ruffle his hair, and he didn't pull away, but instead leaned into my touch. It was the first time he came home from school, and his footsteps were not quiet and cautious, but loud and energetic as he ran to tell me about his day. The first true breakthrough came on a Saturday morning. I was making pancakes, a clumsy affair for me, and as I tried to flip one with a confident flick of the wrist, it sailed through the air and landed with a soft splat on the floor. I stood there, spatula in hand, looking at the mess. For a moment there was silence, and then I heard it. A small giggle at first, which then erupted into a full, deep, wonderful belly laugh. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I looked at him, truly laughing for the first time since he had come to live with me, and I felt a joy so pure it brought tears to my eyes. I started laughing too, and soon we were both leaning against the counter laughing until our sides hurt, all because of one fallen pancake. Slowly, the nightmares that had woken him in the night began to fade. The flinching stopped. He started to fill the house with his presence, with his drawings taped to the refrigerator, his sneakers left by the door, and the sound of his voice no longer a whisper, but a confident declaration of his thoughts and feelings. We worked in the garden together, his small hands in the dirt next to mine. I showed him the spot where his grandmother Rose used to grow her prize-winning tomatoes. I told him how she would talk to her plants, convinced it helped them grow. In sharing my memories of her, I felt like I was giving him back a piece of the loving family history that had been stolen from him. We were not just planting seeds in the ground. We were planting the roots of a new life, a life built on the solid foundation of unconditional love. One evening I found him asleep on the couch, a book resting on his chest. I gently took the book and covered him with a blanket. I stood there for a long time just watching him, this precious boy who had been through so much. I hadn't just saved him from a cold porch on Thanksgiving. I was watching him come back to life moment by quiet moment. And in healing him, I realized he was also healing me. 1 year later, and the air of Thanksgiving is different. The biting cold of last November has been replaced by a gentle autumn crispness. My house is not quiet. It is filled with the rich, wonderful sound of life. The dining table is not set with fine china or crystal glasses, but with my everyday dishes, the ones Rose and I picked out together so many years ago. There is no massive turkey, but a perfectly roasted chicken sits in the center, golden and fragrant. And the table is not filled with strangers trying to impress one another. It is filled with family. David Carter and his wife are here, their laughter a warm and familiar sound. And across from me sits Leo. He is not the same boy. The haunted, fearful look in his eyes is gone, replaced by a bright, curious spark. He is taller, healthier, and at this very moment he is telling a story about a frog he found by the creek, his hands gesturing wildly, his voice full of the unself-conscious joy that is a child's birthright. He laughs a deep, happy sound that fills the room, and everyone at the table laughs with him. As I look at him, at this vibrant, thriving boy, I feel a sense of peace so profound it settles deep in my bones. I did not just save him, I was given the gift of watching him bloom. My son Andre chose a different path. I hear he is working a simple sales job in another state. I hope one day he finds a way to heal himself. But my focus is no longer on the past. It is here in this room, in this perfect, ordinary moment. This is the legacy Rose and I set out to build. It was never about the house or the money and the trust. Those were just tools. They were the fence we built to protect the garden. And here at this table is the garden itself thriving in the sunlight. True family isn't a performance for guests. It's the quiet, steady warmth you feel when you are exactly where you are supposed to be. And as Leo looks over at me and gives me a brilliant, trusting smile, I know I am home. This entire experience taught me a profound lesson. A true legacy isn't measured by the size of a house or the balance in a bank account, but by the safety of a child and the warmth of a loving home. We build our real foundations, not with money and ambition, but with unwavering kindness, respect, and the courage to protect what is right. A life built on a rotten foundation of cruelty, no matter how beautiful it looks on the outside, is just a house of cards destined to collapse. True strength is nurturing the vulnerable and upholding the values that last. What do you believe is the true foundation of a strong family? Share your thoughts in the comments below.